we are here with CJ Ramone of the Ramones. Thank you for doing this interview with us. We are C Squared on behalf of Disarray magazine. I'm Christy.
I'm Chris.
And let the audience know who you are.
Hi, CJ Ramone from the world famous Ramones. Played with the band from '89 till they retired in 1996.
All right. And when you were auditioning for the Ramones, how did that feel?
Yeah, it was. I have to say I had no expectation to get the gig because I was in the Marine Corps at the time. I was stationed down at Camp Pendleton, but I was back home in New York, and I just went down to meet the band. I was like, wow, it'd be cool to meet them. I had a friend that played in a band with Joey's brother, and he's the one who told me about it. So I went down with no expectation, so I wasn't nervous or anything. I just walked in and I was like, Johnny, hey, how's it going? Great to meet you. I'm a big fan. I had my Yankee hat on because I knew Johnny was a big Yankee fan and all. So, yeah, I just I had no expectations, so I wasn't as nervous as I could have been walking into an audition for the Ramones.
But you recall that day, like you remember like what they made you do to try out for them? Like, did they have you play a couple chords, or they do like a whole song?
No, so I actually was the first one to audition. Being a Marine, right? I was, my buddy told me about the audition. I got there, a half hour early, and parked outside the studio and just sat there and waited and watched the guys go in. And I waited a little bit and then I went in. So I was the first one there. But I had never played. I had never played any Ramone songs before. So I literally sat down and learned a couple of songs. And I didn't play with a pick. I was a finger player. I was like a big heavy metal guy. Like I was into Geezer Butler and Steve Harris from Iron Maiden and those types of bass players. Of course, I love Dee Dee and Paul Simonon and Captain Sensible and all those, all the great punk bass players. But the fact is I was a finger player, and I knew walking into a Ramones audition that was not going to get it. So I just stopped and bought a couple of picks and figured out a couple of songs real quick and walked in, and Johnny was like, okay, what songs do you know? After I got all set up and everything, he was like, what songs do you know? And I was like, I Want to Be Sedated. And he was like, oh, okay, fine. And we played through it, and then we stopped. And, he asked me about the Yankees, and he was like, Johnny's way of judging whether or not you were a real fan was he would ask you how many shows Ramone shows you had been to. So I said, I don't know, 10 or 12, 15, something like that. And he was like, oh, okay, you're a real fan, that. We played the song again. He said, okay, let's play it again. Marky counted it off. While we were playing, Joey walked in. So when we finished up, I walked over to Joey and introduced myself and, hey, yeah, nice to meet you, and blah, blah. And then I just left. And the tour manager, Monty Melnick, said to me, okay, we'll let you know, thanks for coming down. And I went home and I called everybody I knew. I just jammed with the Ramones, Everyone's like, what? I go, yeah, they had an open audition. I just walked in and played. So it was really fun. I got a call back, and I went back and forth a bunch of times. They auditioned a good amount of guys. They auditioned 30, 40 guys or something like that. And I was the first one. And Johnny said he knew from when he first saw me, he said, I knew that
you were the one.
This was a guy. Well, first he said, I read this in interviews that he did. He said, when I left, he thought to himself, oh, this is going to be easy, because he felt like I fit so well. And then there was only one other guy that got a call back besides me. There was only one guy that actually went to more than one audition from how it was explained to me. And that was Phil Caivano from Monster Magnet. Phil, is really well known on the scene in New York. He had a band called Blitzbeer. They were a really great band. He was a really good songwriter. But Johnny just, I think when Johnny found out that I was in the Marine Corps, that's why he was like, all right, we want that guy. Because after all the craziness he went through with Dee Dee for all those years, he wanted somebody stable who would come in, be able to nail the song. Right, I'm very mission oriented. I'm like, tell me what you want to do, what time I have to be there, and no problem, you know. So I think that's part of the reason why he picked me for the job.
Nice. How did it feel taking that spot? You know, like because
Yeah.
that's a big spot to fill. And then when he decided to leave, and then they're looking for someone, you're like, oh, did it weigh on you, or was it just like new fresh to you? Because I mean, like you're just coming out of the Marine Corps doing all that, so you're just like balls to the wall to anything in the world, right? You know what I mean? Like you just wanted to take charge and handle it your way. Did you have?
And that's what I did. That's a
Yeah.
really good way of putting it. That's what I did. I did not try to replace. I didn't try to replace Dee Dee. You know, Dee Dee. When I heard Dee Dee left the band, because I had heard he left the band, and I was riding in a truck with a friend of mine, and and it came over the radio. We had an alternative music station on Long Island that used to play the Ramones, and because everybody knows Ramones didn't get played on commercial radio, except for Rodney on the Rock. He was probably the only commercial radio DJ. But they came over the radio and they said Dee Dee Ramone announced today that he's leaving the Ramones. And I turned to my buddy and and this is God's honest truth. I said, I'll never go to another Ramones show because it ain't the Ramones without Dee Dee. So of course I couldn't have been more wrong, right? I ended up being at every show they ever did for the rest of their career. But yeah, I didn't try to be Dee Dee, and that really worked to my advantage. I got into the band and I was like, I got hired to do a job. I have to do my absolute best. And being a Ramones fan, you know, since I was young, I really wanted to help them to be like they were when I saw them early on, you know, in 1980 or 81, whatever it was, the first year I saw them. When they were still fiery, you know, they were really fiery, and that was how I went at it. And you know, I was very fit and so motivated and focused, and so I just, you know, got in a band. I learned 40 songs in 5 weeks. I had 5 weeks to rehearse before we left to do our first tour. Yeah, that's how I went at it. I just didn't try to be Dee Dee. Nobody could be Dee Dee. Dee Dee literally is, you can almost say he's the inventor of punk rock, because everybody bit off of Dee Dee, you know?
Yeah.
And Dee Dee's style did not come from punk rock. It came from the proto-punk bands like the Stooges and the New York Dolls and the Heartbreakers and the MC5. Like, he was influenced by that stuff, you know? But through the Dee Dee Ramone filter, we got the punk sound, you know, and realistically, I should say, I mean, it's not just Dee Dee, but he was part of that, the formation of that sound, because the guy that really created the whole thing, created the image and the sound and everything, was actually Tommy Ramone.
Tommy, huh?
Tommy was the you know, the Ramones were Tommy's brainchild.
Yeah.
And I mean, down to who played what instrument, and the leather jackets and jeans and the sneakers and the sound. And Tommy never intended to be the drummer, but he couldn't find a drummer to play the style that he heard in his head. So he said, I'm just going to sit down and play the drums until we find somebody. And of course, that turned into 3 albums of unbelievable
Joey
material.
wasn't doing too good on the drums, huh? That's why you didn't want him on there.
Yeah. But but that's how I avoided, not even avoided, but that's how I avoided the pressure of replacing Dee Dee, was just to not try to be Dee Dee and just to be myself, you know, just to let it all out while I was on stage, and it worked good. Worked to my advantage.
You did a great job.
Thanks, brother.
how did it feel being in the band that was like the foundation for so many bands rising up?
Yeah, that's where the pressure came in. That's what, because even though I'm not focused on being Dee Dee, I understand the importance of the Ramones and the legacy. Like, I recognize that I was with the band probably for the last incarnation of the band. I understood that. Johnny actually told me that early on. 1991 or 92, he said to me, he was like, "We're going to retire in 95." He said, "This is all going to be over in a couple of years, so make sure you're saving your money." And he was really good like that. So he gave me plenty of advance notice. And of course, we started our retirement tour in 95, but then we got offered Lollapalooza in 96. And that's why the band carried over for another year. But yeah, I definitely felt the pressure back then. And even now, whether it's an interview like this or recording, or performing live, I'm always hyper aware that I am, operating under the Ramone flag. And I try to make sure that everything I do under that name is the best quality that I possibly can put out.
Carrying the name out. I mean, like, when you join the band, like, you're automatically having to change that name. Like, it's now CJ Ramone instead of CJ Ward, So, like, how does that, I mean, just to even say it, it's like I can just see the smile. You're just like, yeah, it is. And you have to, that's with you, the rest of your life. You're a Ramone.
Yeah. So I did an interview recently, and the interviewer asked me, he was like, does it feel like a burden, or do you feel like you gave up your name to be in the Ramones? Like, did you give anything up? And I was like, absolutely not. It's a burden that I'm happy to carry. I'm happy to carry it, and whether or not I'm the best spokesman, and I wasn't there for the beginning, and all that stuff. I'm totally aware of all of that. But what I try to do is make sure that whenever I speak of the Ramones or like this in an interview, I just try to make sure that I'm not putting any false information out there. I'm not trying to repaint the Ramones legacy. I'm probably too honest about some of the stuff that went on, but there's been so much misinformation and just, this is a funny one. So the Ramones, while they were together, it was literally like the Fight Club. You don't talk about the Fight Club, right? There was no discussion about what happened behind the scenes. None. From the beginning of their career all the way to the end of that career, there was no discussion about anything. Any information that went out through the publicist, or anything that you said in interviews, it wasn't the party line. I was free to say whatever I wanted to say, as long as it didn't have to do with the camp, right? So in situations like that, when there's a lack of information and there's just little pieces that come out, people join those little pieces of information together with a whole lot of bullshit. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, they just straight up invent stuff sometimes. So there's been some crazy stories that people have asked me about over the years, and I'm like, does that actually sound like anything that you've heard about the band before? So I'm like, well, it was up on this message board, or on this fan site. People are saying, and I'm always like, you really have to. You really have to check your sources when you hear stuff like that, because there's been so much misinformation. So on my show, on CJ Says, on my podcast, that's one of the things that we're attempting to do is get some of the guys who were around in the early days, and that's everybody from Ed Stasium, who produced a bunch of records for the Ramones, George DuBose, who did a bunch of their album covers, photographer, and Bob Gruen, who documented the whole scene down there. We've had Tish and Snooki, who were part of the early punk scene in New York and went on to be, they are entrepreneurs pretty much, but still playing bands and everything. So we've been bringing in all these people from the early days to get them to tell some stories that maybe not have been put out there before, but in the process of that, there is a lot of new information that nobody had heard yet. That I really find, for me, it feels really good to hear those types of stories, because of course we're talking about stuff that happened when I was, 7 years old, 8 years old, long before I was a Ramones fan. But so that's part of the mission of the podcast, is to try to get that kind of stuff out there.
Clear up the gaps.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite memory so far from your podcast?
Oh my Lord. So on the podcast, we're doing what we call the deep dive series. So we're doing the Ramones discography in chronological order, and we're doing the deep dive on every record. We're talking about the production and the producer and what band members and what outside players and the songwriting and the lyrics and just everything we possibly can. And we're really digging in on each and every record. The beautiful thing about that is I have been a music geek my whole life. Like really, and I'm lucky enough to have grown up in a house where I was exposed to everything from classical music to country and rockabilly and everything in between. My mom and dad loved music, like above all the cultural and all the other cultural stuff. Music really was the dominating cultural infusion in our house. So when I used to listen to the early Ramones records, I had all these thoughts in my head of just, what does that lyric mean? What is he talking about right there? Or like, that's such an odd timing thing they're doing. So I had all these things that I always wondered about, and I never really voiced them to anybody because I realized I was, most people didn't listen to it in the way that I did, or I didn't think anybody really heard it the way that I did. I was a bit introverted when I was a kid. So a lot of stuff that I did by myself, because I just thought everyone would think I was weird if I started talking about that, like, what do you think he meant about that lyric? But it's so cool now at 60 years old to be able to sit down on a podcast across from a guy who's, a veteran in podcasts and have his own shows, and been successful, to sit down and really geek out hard on all of these Ramones records and all of the memories I have attached to it and all that. And I love doing the interviews, absolutely love doing the interviews and hearing the stories. But I think the deep dive series has been the part of the podcast that I have enjoyed, like really enjoyed the most, because interviews can be tricky. They can be tricky. Like, I'm new to it. I'm totally new to it. So the interview, being on the other side of the interview is takes there's a skill there. But that's what I love about podcasts, as opposed to traditional media. The long form podcast has really changed the flow of information on a scale that I don't think most people are aware of yet.
Yeah.
Whereas before it would kind of be a question and answer thing. It would be, hey, what about this? And you would give an answer to that specific thing, and then it would be move on to the next question. This kind of exchange comes off way more as a conversation rather than an interview. You know what I mean? And it's so cool to sit down with people who are legends from the punk rock community, sit down with them and just have a discussion with them about, why they love music and of course we talk to them about their best memories of the Ramones and Ramones shows and, were you influenced at all by the Ramones? So, and the conversations take all these weird twists and turns, and you go down rabbit holes, and all of a sudden you realize, like, oh my God, it's been 3 hours that we're sitting here.
Yes.
But it
It's
really
more
does
intimate. Yeah.
it makes podcasting. It really has changed the way that information flows, and there's so much more information that comes out in that way than in a traditional media platform.
Right.
You mentioned something earlier that caught my attention when you said you used to be an introvert. Do you have any advice for kids out there or teens or just anyone who is an introvert right now and maybe they just want to stay home and maybe we're like, dude, you should go check out a show?
Yeah. It was I was definitely an awkward kid, and everybody matures at different rates and stuff, but I was always the most immature kid around, and I was hyper aware of that. But I found that when I stopped trying to fit in, and I just got into the things that I was into by myself and got really knowledgeable about things and became comfortable with myself. When I got to the point where I felt like, I knew, I just knew myself. I knew that the things that I was into, I was really into, because I got into literature and I used to read encyclopedias when I was a kid. I would
I was
just
gonna say, just say it, just
yeah.
come out with it.
Just for just like the a thirst for knowledge, but it made me get really interested in things like astronomy and oceanography, and I had all these varied interests. And before, I always felt like I was under pressure to talk about what everybody else was talking about. But once I got to the point where I knew the things that I was interested in, it was easier to find people that I got along with, because I could, if anybody else in class was like showed any interest in astronomy, I would immediately be like, hey, do you follow like the phases of the moon?
Right.
I would just geek out hard like that. But it was it was definitely difficult when I was young, but as I got older, it really was a strength, because I did not spend all of my teenage years trying to pound myself into a box that I didn't fit in. I just kind of built my own little thing, and that's always been, even with my kids, I was just telling them, whatever you like, just get after it and learn as much as you can about it. We did that with musical instruments. We left musical instruments my house was full of musical instruments, right? I wasn't pushing them to play them, but I just left them out to see what they would pick up. So, my middle one would go over and bang on the piano. I said, oh, do you want to learn how to play? You know what I mean? And that's how we kind of inspired them. But our house was always filled with art, and, before actually just after we moved here, I sold all my books, just held on to a couple that I really love. But our house was always filled with books, always filled with literature and stuff. So, I feel like that is the best way to turn your introversion I don't know if that's a word. To work for you, to work for you is to, is to become as knowledgeable as you possibly can about all the things you're interested in, and then you'll find the people who are like you. And even if they don't like necessarily what you're into, even just being able to recognize somebody who goes after things as hard as you do,
Yeah.
somebody who's like really motivated to learn a lot about a lot of different things. And then, there's that you have something to connect with them on.
You're not the only one out there. There's others out there that do the same thing as you're doing. You just need to find them. And
Yeah.
jeez, that's good.
That's
Yeah.
actually really great advice. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Um, Best piece of advice I ever received. I had a teacher in high school who, in high school, I was a really bad kid. I never went to school. I was so bad. I never went to school. I would hitchhike to the beach or I'd go to the mall. I was just really bad in 10th grade, my first year in high school. Well, first year was ninth grade, but 10th grade, I was just really bad. And it was, just teenager stuff, I was just seeing how far I could take things. But I got put into a special program for kids who were, who didn't like school. And there was a teacher that I had. His name was Mr. Wanger, and every day I would walk into his classroom and I would write a line from a song or a line from a poem or something from one of my favorite authors. Every time when I walked in his room, I don't know why I did it. I just used to walk in. So in this program, it was very laid back. Like they made it easy for us to want to be there because the teachers were really cool with us. It was just a real relaxed atmosphere, and it made it easier. Just made it easier for us to go to school. But he said to me one day, he said, "You like writing?" I said, "No, I like to read. I read a lot and I listen to a lot of music." And he goes, "Look, you obviously are interested in some high end stuff." He said, "How about I give you a shot at writing for the school newspaper. I'll give you a subject. You write on the subject. If it's good, I'll put it in the paper, and then maybe we'll see about having you write for the paper." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah." He's like, "I think you could probably do it." So I was like, "I'll give it a shot, sure." So I wrote the article for the newspaper, and it ended up, I got like an award for it because I had researched the heck out of it and like did really got into it, and I stayed within the parameters of how many words it was supposed to be and everything. And he said to me, he said, he's like, "You have a talent." He was like, you have a talent, don't squander it. He was like, "Don't squander your talent." And I was like, that's the first time anybody had said anything like that to me. I mean, when I was a kid, I sang in choir and, I had a super high voice. So I was in the choir every year. But nobody ever said to me, "Oh, you have a nice voice." The teacher would just hit the note on the piano and you'd have to hit it. And if you could hit it, she'd be like, "Okay, you're a soprano, go over there." But nobody ever said, "Oh, you have a great voice" or anything. But it was the first time somebody told me that I had talent. But the takeaway from it was when he told me not to squander it. He's like, "You have a talent. You really have a talent." And I was already playing in bands and stuff. And I started writing myself. And of course, the first stuff I wrote was basically a rehashing of a lot of the classical stuff that I had read. But eventually, I developed my own style of lyric writing and all that, and I like to think that I achieved a modicum of success with writing my own songs. But yeah, that was the best advice anybody ever gave me was don't squander your talent. If you're good at something, make sure you do something with it.
That's cool. I like that.
That's awesome. Going back to the podcast, can you let our audience know more about it? Where can they listen to it? How often do you put out episodes?
So we do an episode a week, and that's you can get it across all the streaming platforms. But what we do is like when we do the deep dives, side A is across all the streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff, and that's free. And then if you want to hear the B side, where we kind of do the deeper dive when we get into the album cover and all that, you can go to patreon.com/CJ Says, and you pay a couple bucks a month, and you get all the bonus stuff and the extended interviews and stuff like that on Patreon. But it's called CJ Says. It's named we got the name from Danny Says, the Ramones song Danny Says.
Yeah.
I had recorded a cover of that at one point with some friends of mine from Panama, and my producer Matt Stocks heard it and he thought it was a good idea, and that's how it came to be. But it's the episodes, whether free or on Patreon, I'll guarantee you they're really, really entertaining. I have a problem like hearing my own voice and watching myself to this day. It's bizarre. But I've actually sat through an episode and I was really happy with it because my concern is it's going to be boring. It's going to be boring. Like me sitting there glowering over,
geeking out on the covers and stuff, but it's we all think it. I'll tell you the truth. I do too. Even the lyrics and the way they strum things, I'm like, yeah, I wonder if I'm the only one. But now that with this podcast, it's like good to have because, yeah, we kind of want to know that. We want to know the thoughts that went into everything.
Yeah.
So it's good. I'm not the only one.
Yeah, you're not. You're definitely not. And like I said before, this is such a great platform because it's I can't even call them interviews. They're discussions. They're they really don't come off like interviews at all. It's just Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins has got a podcast, and he's had some incredibly great guests on his show, and they've gotten into some really, really good topics on there and stuff you would never expect to hear. And his podcast is one of my newer favorite ones that I really enjoy listening to because there's something about that. There's just something about that conversational thing that really, really humanizes the topic, the subject when it's more than just the facts.
Right.
And I think that's what I like about it more, that you really feel more of a connection with the person, with the people that are talking. And I mean, for me, I'll put on my headphones and put on a podcast, and I almost feel like I'm in the room. I almost feel like I'm not watching it from a distance. It almost feels like you're part of the conversation, and that's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, and you're nodding your head like you're in there too. You're like, yeah,
yeah,
good point. It's like you're really in it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome. So one more question. Why do you think it took you so long to come up with your podcast?
Yeah, so I actually retired from touring in 2019. I lost a fair amount of my hearing, and I wasn't able to sing anymore. I was really struggling singing. So in 2019, I announced that I was retiring. I put out my last record, did a world tour for it, and then So that was November 2019. I did my final shows in Perth, Australia. I came home, and that next March was the lockdown. So I couldn't have planned my retirement better. You know what I mean? I couldn't have planned it better. But the Gimmies had been in touch with me, and I had done a couple of one-offs with them. And then post lockdown, they said, "Hey, would you be willing to do it full time with us?" And I was like, "Really don't want to be on tour all the time, but sure." I pictured myself. I wanted to buy a fishing boat and do fishing charters out of San Francisco, and I had this whole retirement plan. But the Gimmies drew me back in, and I just felt like I needed to be doing something else other than playing music, And my co-host Matt, he and I had done a couple of interviews together over the years, and then I saw him on the Flogging Molly cruise like 2 years back. We did an interview, and we got really deep on a subject really near and dear to my heart, which was my oldest child is autistic. So we started talking about my son, and we got really deep on it. And after that interview, he was like, I really would like to work with you. So he and my manager got together, and they put the idea together, and they pitched it to me. And like I said, I was already a fan of podcasts.
Yeah.
But I have that thing being from New York. Like, I can recite Shakespeare and still sound like a goon. So I'm always, when it comes to speaking publicly, I always have that in the back of my mind. But he said to me, he was like, "No, you have good personality, and you speak from the heart a lot, and that I think that really reaches people. If you just continue to just be yourself on the podcast, if you can do that, because apparently not everybody can do that. Some people like get in front of a mic or get on film, and all of a sudden they become like robotic, or they don't know how to just be themselves. Me, I only know how to be myself. But I love the idea, and all the stuff that they were throwing at me. I loved it. I was like, that sounds like so much fun. I really would love to do that. And that's kind of how it all came to be. And I'm sure you guys are in the process of finding out. It really is enjoyable. It really is. It's cool to connect with people, on a different level in a discussion that goes on for a while, and you access all kinds of stuff that wouldn't come out in any other format.
Yeah, that is true.
Well, that was all our questions for you, CJ. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us here at Disarray Magazine.
Yeah, it was great. And good luck with the podcast. It really is fun. I really enjoy it.